You're listening to The Switch. The Switch is a podcast about ideas and experiences that change our minds. I'm Chase Harris, joined as always by my co-host, Alex Berner.
Hello.
And today we're going to skip most of our normal intro because this is going to be a live, or not live. This is going to be a video. We're going to put out the whole thing, mostly unedited. And I'm going to go right into our quote to get started and then introduce our guest. So our quote today is from Epictetus. He says, "Some things are in our control and others are not. Things in our control are our opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, property, reputation, command, and, in a word, whatever are not our own actions." And with that, I'd like to introduce our guest for today, Mike the Cop. Mike, welcome to The Switch.
What's up, man? That's some deep stuff.
Yeah, we like to go deep sometimes. Before we get started, can you give us some background on who you are? Obviously, you were not born Mike the Cop. You were born Mike. So talk us through getting from that point to where you are now.
Yeah, try not to make it some crazy story, but it starts in the 70s, and I was born on a cold February night. I went into law enforcement in 2009, and in the course of that, tons of different experiences as a cop. And around 2014, I decided to start writing about some of those experiences, and I started blogging. And for you kids listening to the podcast here, that's before video, than when people wrote their thoughts instead of did video about it. And that was well received, and ultimately led me to connect with a lady who had been doing some writing online about law enforcement as well. Elizabeth is what she goes by online. And so she had written this article called Dear Officer. We connected because of sharing each other's writings on our blog. That led to a Facebook page called Humanizing the Badge. And we started just engaging online with folks, not with really any other agenda at the time than wanting to convey that cops are people just like everyone else. And in so doing, that as that grew, we began to ask ourselves, how do we continue to grow this? And video was becoming a much more popular thing. And at the time, I was watching this guy named Officer Daniels on Vine, and he was doing funny short videos, 6.5 seconds long. And we thought, well, we can try some videos. So I tried my hand at making a couple of those short videos, and they were really well received. And after a few months of that, it was kind of like, well, I don't want Humanizing the Badge to be all about my video content. And that's where the Mike the Cop specific, social media was born, and I've just been doing it ever since, basically.
Nice. All right. So yeah, I think our major topic for today is humanizing the badge. I want to get into that mission of, showing cops as people like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to ask about your perception of police before you became a police officer. Like growing up, how did you think of cops, and how did your mindset either change or not over time?
I think that I grew up with a healthy respect for authority, I guess. I didn't fear cops. I think when I got pulled over, my heart dropped and got a little nervous like anybody else, because more like, oh, I got caught speeding or not wearing my seatbelt or whatever it is,
Yeah.
Not because I was afraid of the person that was pulling me over. It's just like, oh crap, I think that's about it. So I had an uncle who was a reserve police officer. My brother was a police officer before me. So I guess I always just saw officers as people, and some of my friends who I had worked in security with at a retail chain had gone on to become police officers. So in that capacity, I worked alongside them when they came to pick up the shoplifter that I caught or whatever. Like, so before I was a cop, I think I had already had sort of like a friendly perception of police officers and kind of already had a little bit of an idea about what that job was like. I would say the only thing that changed for me is realizing, you can talk about it a lot, but obviously it's one of those things where you kind of have to experience the job firsthand to truly appreciate and understand, what the job entails and how that has an impact on somebody, as a person.
Yeah. So where do you think the public perception of police is at the moment? If you had to sort of take the temperature of public perception, obviously it's varied in different places, but how would you sort of assess the current situation?
It probably depends on where you look. But I think overall, most people appreciate the police and appreciate law and order. And I think that for the most part, the negativity is a small chunk that is sort of like the squeaky wheel. So I think there's some false perceptions even among the police supporters. I've got personal friends that when I became a cop, like it ask all kinds of questions, just because there's a certain perception of police officers, but it's not born out of negativity. It's born out of curiosity. There's sort of like, I think movies and TV and all that stuff have kind of created this concept of policing that even those who are like pro police still have no clue what being a police officer is about or what it's like or whatever else. So that's why I say it's like more a curiosity than negativity. And so I'm a big believer in trying to be objective about this stuff. And most of the time, most people are just fine with the police. I think that's the reality. Now, when it comes to perception, I think there's a ton of false perceptions driven by that small chunk of negativity that gets magnified or focused on. And I think that bleeds over into, where law enforcement meets culture. And I think that's where I want to sort of like be on that bleeding edge, addressing those issues.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you go about addressing those issues? I mean, I think maybe the place to start is like, where does that come from? When people have, either misconceptions or negative perceptions about police, like where does that come from, and how do you go about starting to address that?
Well, I think it comes from, a variety of sources, some malicious, and some ignorant, right? And I use ignorant in the sense of like literally they just don't know what they don't know. So they just fill in the gaps. So it's like, oh, well, we'll just insert our assumptions here because we don't really know the answers. And I think that that's a dangerous way. And I think that's what happens in social media is you've got sort of like pseudo reporters. Journalism is a different beast these days because anybody can be a journalist, I guess, on social media. And so where they don't know things, they just sort of drop in their assumptions. And I think that's a dangerous thing. I think that's where some of the perception issues are there. And then you've got a malicious side where there is some blatantly false things that are put out. Like I would lump in like a Sean King with that, where he blatantly lies. I don't think Sean is ignorant. I think he's a liar. And I think he's an evil person because he blatantly says things that are untrue, that he knows better, and he does it on purpose to further a particular narrative and to create division. I think that exists, but I think it's a minority. And then I think we address that by, two ways of building bridges. One is being committed to the truth, no matter where that takes us. Like, and people might take that the wrong way when I say that, as though I have the market cornered on truth. I don't. I make mistakes. I get things wrong. And that's true in my past, my present, and my future. I'll never be perfect. But I think if we can step back and say, hey, 2 + 2 = 4, no matter whether I want it to be 5 or whether I want it to be 3. And so the truth about a police situation, or about legislation, or about, criminal justice system things, issues, positive or like, there's some objectivity available for us to all look at with that. And I think that we need to be committed to that, no matter how it makes me look, no matter how you look. We all need to step back and go, hey, are you really committed to the truth? And I think that's a good place to start. I don't get caught up in a lot of arguments with people, because very often I say, like, if I show you information that contradicts what you're asserting, are you actually interested in changing your mind?
Right.
And a lot of people are like, well, no, not really. Or they won't answer the question. Well, then I know I don't need to waste my time, because unless we're committed to the truth, what are we really doing here?
Right.
And then I think that you have to have a way of communicating the truth that breaks down barriers. For me, that's been a lot of humor and sarcasm and just being myself, really. So I think the means, the medium is important, and that's why I've chosen to be on social media. And I think humor is sort of like the tip of the spear for me. And I've done other videos and content that is more serious or whatever else too. But, humor, if you can make somebody laugh, if you can joke it, if you can make fun of yourself for being whatever else, it can tend to break down those barriers.
Yeah. So I was talking to one of my friends about the fact that I was going to be talking to you, and I think he and I have different, slightly different opinions about law enforcement. Like I'm fairly pro law enforcement, and I think he's sort of middle ground. And one of the things that he brought up is sort of the difference between public perception of actual problems in policing and police perception of problems in policing. How do you see, like when people say, look, I'm totally good with law enforcement, I understand cops are people, but there are legitimate problems we have to address of like police violence, or things like that. How do you talk about those types of issues?
Well, maybe you could get a little bit more specific.
Sure.
With maybe give me an example that I could address, because I mean, that's kind of like
Yeah.
it's a little broad, because I guess if you could get a little bit more specific, then I could maybe
Definitely. So
grab a hold of that.
I think part of this comes from the sort of media coverage of incidents where you see like body camera footage of police officers like being fairly aggressive with trying to detain someone or something like that, and the attitude around the coverage is, this is excessive use of force. Police need to be better trained not to abuse people like this, etc. I'm not sure if I can come up with a specific example, but I think that's where this comes from, is the sort of media coverage of specifically like hands-on, very forceful or violent detainment.
Sure. I guess to me, I would start with the principle that knowing and understanding and our perception are two different things. And use of force, from verbal through deadly force, the entire spectrum, is never pretty. It's never enjoyable. It doesn't look good. It doesn't feel good. And in a lot of ways, it shouldn't, right? Because this is abnormal, right? Normal behavior is two adults being able to communicate with each other like grown-ups, even when they disagree, being able to have a conversation with people and speak to people in a way that is honest but respectful. That's normal, and that's what people would love to see. But when someone is not cooperative, and so now we begin this process along the spectrum of use of force, it's not enjoyable to watch ever. Because it's abnormal, and it should make us uncomfortable. And so I get that. But I would also encourage people who are made uncomfortable by that to then understand there is a difference between perception and reality, as far as how you how you get someone who, for example, can be or should be legally detained or arrested or whatever, who doesn't want to be.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. And so, like, I always ask, like, well, how should it be handled? What suggestions do you have, along the way? And then I would also say, like, 2020 hindsight on a situation on a body cam that only tells a very limited slice of a story. Man, I would hate for everybody's life to be judged that way.
Yeah.
So if you only have, like, think about the most tense moments of our lives, only having one part of that on body cam from one perspective, it makes, it's hard for people to wrap their minds around that. And I think most cops respect that and be like, well, you just don't understand. What are you going to do? You can't, it's hard to explain, but we got to do our best.
Yeah. Do you think that there are, sort of internal problems with policing and law enforcement that are broad and that could be addressed, or do you think that that's, I don't know. Yeah, we'll go with that. Do you think that there are broad problems that could be addressed? I think, for example, we could talk about, like, uh, escalation or de-escalation of force training, something like that.
So I thought the broad issues that need to be addressed, if for law enforcement wide, are more criminal justice system
Okay.
than they are the actual act of policing, right? When we think about a police department who's sort of like on the day-to-day is answering calls, again, so people understand, like, they're being requested to come there, right? So, like, and then the rest of the time they're self-initiating contacts to prevent crime or to stop crime in progress and all that stuff, which is a benefit to a community. I think on the day-to-day process for that, I actually don't think there's a lot of issues to be addressed. For the most part, I think that's what society has said they want, and what they're getting. Are there individual officers or individual, like, clusters, maybe a department that has kind of, like, become toxic and needs to be addressed? Yeah, probably. But I think on a broad scale, for the most part, day in and day out, cops are doing exactly what we expect them to do in the way that we expect them to do it. Broadly, I would say that, the criminal justice system, as far as, what the penalties for certain crimes or the lack of penalty for certain crimes, the consistency in sentencing, there's certain things broadly that I see as hugely problematic. Why can a guy who has had his third drunk driving offense, still have a license, but somebody who, smoked marijuana and got caught with a baggie of it doing time in jail?
Yeah.
Why is somebody who has beat their wives and been arrested for it 5 times not in prison, and somebody who did something else is? Like, there's all sorts of these, like, sentencing guidelines that are just all over the place. And I think that if in a broad sense, could be changed or fixed. And that's a whole, I mean, that'd be a significant conversation, but I think that on a broad sense needs to be addressed over time.
And I think that's probably one of the reasons that some of the burden of that, or the, result, falls on police officers, as seeming like the people doing this to, enforcing laws that might be unjust or need to be revised. But
Sure.
you guys are the ones that end up having to be the ones to uphold the law. So
Yeah. It's kind of like, we're easy scapegoats because we're the visible side of that.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you ever have to, or I guess you probably inevitably have to. So how do you deal with, say, arresting someone for a crime that you know is disproportionately prosecuted in the legal system?
So there's a couple of aspects. One is that there's a lot of discretion depending on where you're at that you have. Like, for example, I mean, now recreational marijuana is now allowed in Michigan to a certain extent, but I probably haven't arrested someone for weed in 4 years. So I don't have to, like I was at a department where I had that discretion. Maybe a department policy is no, everyone with marijuana will be arrested. They can take that by policy away from you. But where I have discretion, I use it, but there's another side of that coin that says, like, listen, like, part of being committed to a society that is both free and secure is finding those balances. And the reality is that, like, if you don't want to be arrested for marijuana, don't put it in your car and drive around with it, you douchebag. Like, like you did that. Like, well, this is stupid for arresting me. Yeah, okay, I can agree with you that it's stupid. You're the moron who put it in your car and drove with it. You're the dummy, not me. Like, I didn't make you do this. Like, you want to smoke it at home and whatever, yeah. But if there's a law against transporting it a certain way or whatever else, like, follow the law. Like, and I get it, because normally, like, oh, so we're just supposed to bow down and do whatever you say. Like, nah, you know what? Talk to your neighbor who voted for this law. Like, this, these laws just don't magically appear. Cops don't sit down in a circle in a dark room and decide what laws to come up with. That's not a thing. So, if you don't like how something is in society, then let's find beneficial ways to make changes to that. And then I'm not enforcing a law that you think is stupid anymore. Like, believe me, I don't care. Like, whatever. Yeah. But sometimes we have these laws that we think are stupid, but the answer isn't to just violate them, and then blame the cop because they're enforcing a law that already exists. Like, right. So it's an interesting little dance. I get it. But where there's discretion, sometimes I use it, like, oh, well, if I can give this person a break on this because I'm not into it. And there's extremes, right? Like, if there was or like that, which I actually don't think we're close to, but if that were to happen, I just turn in my stuff, because I would never do that, because it's a violation of my conscience. Like, I couldn't do that morally or ethically for me. So there's those things everybody has to deal with.
Yeah. So I want to circle this back around to humanizing the badge. Are there any, like, stories or incidents you've had where you've actually seen someone's mind, like, change on the spot about law enforcement? Like, how do you have any specific instances of, like, breaking through to people and seeing that actual change happen?
Yeah. I mean, like, via social media, even people that I haven't directly met, I have gotten, an unknown number of messages. I don't know, but people who have said, like, I used to hate cops. I used to be distrusting of cops, but after watching your content and others like you, like, it's really brought me around. I went on a ride along. I have a new respect for the police, or it's really changed my mind. And in some extremes, like, not a crazy, but probably a dozen people over the last 4 years of doing this have actually said, like, I'm actually becoming a cop because of this content that's been put out. Like, it's made me want to do this job or make a difference and that kind of a thing. So I've seen that. And then in person, we've been from everywhere from Ferguson, Missouri to Dallas, Texas, all over the country doing what we call Project Human, where we're bringing together police departments and community organizations together for events. And we've had people, we're not in uniform. We're just sitting there talking to kids or whatever else. And when they realize we're cops, then that light bulb has gone off. Like, oh, I've been talking to a cop this whole time. Like, these cops are here doing something for me. Like, and you see those gears, like, switch in the middle of, doing that event. So yeah, I've definitely seen true real life benefit to what we're doing.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. I think my curiosity is with the process. Like, as you know, this podcast is called The Switch. Our big thing is really looking at ideas and experiences that do that act of just switching somebody's perspective or changing their mind, giving them some sort of position a little bit closer to the way that things really are, or seeing things differently. And yeah, that process of being able to, just sit down with somebody who either may have negative views of police or just in general aren't well informed. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I think it takes patience and the right attitude, because with a little bit of those things, pretty much anybody's mind can be changed on anything if they're willing. So they have to have an openness to having their mind changed to see something differently. And usually, if it's a good comparison, because what happens in the police world is they take exceptions and make them the rule, right? That's how negative police perception hangs on. They take exceptions and they make it the rule. Just like the use of force thing that we talked about earlier. Are there excessive use of force? Yeah, I'm sure. Absolutely, there are. When you're using use of force, there's going to be excessive use of it. It's going to happen because we're all human. But when you have 900,000 cops in this country making not countless, but billions of contacts with civilians every year that are completely normal with no use of force and no problems, and then you want to take the excessive uses, or the ones that don't look good or make you feel good, and make those exceptions the rule. It doesn't make any sense. And usually if someone's open, I can sit down with somebody and we have these conversations and be like, so if you show them how many people are killed each year by medical malpractice, which far exceeds law enforcement deaths, then you take them and say, so do you just not go to the doctor anymore? I mean, like, is that the solution to health, is to stop using doctors? Because sometimes doctors are going to make a mistake, or sometimes doctors are going to be crooked or bad at their job. And then, so we just we just need to not go to doctors, avoid doctors at all costs, because sometimes they make mistakes and sometimes they harm people. This is ignorant, my kids, kids, you're not going to school anymore. I heard about another teacher that slept with a student. So the education system is just too risky for you. Like, this is when we start taking other life examples that people can have actually experienced, because everybody goes to the doctor, everybody, goes to school, car accidents kill a lot of people. we get in cars and drive around still for some reason. So when we start taking experiences that people understand, those are good bridges to then say, like, okay, so now let's apply this to law enforcement and community. Like, now do you get how, we can always be better at just about anything, but is it as bad as people might think it is? No, it's not.
Yeah. And I think in some sense that could also be somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, if you're somebody who's walking around expecting all cops to be excessively violent, and you have some sort of police encounter, like, you're not going to be the type of person who's compliant. You're not going to be the type of person who helps, de-escalate the situation. That could potentially be, in and of itself, a reason for having a negative encounter.
Right. And a lot of people think, like, they take that negativity and, like you said, a self-fulfilling prophecy, and they approach an officer, or when they have contact with an officer, they have a terrible attitude. They speak rudely, they speak poorly, and then they're shocked that the officer responds without being super positive.
Right.
And, you know, the reality is I don't owe you. I don't owe you to be super nice to you. I owe you to be professional, but I can professionally tell you that you're being a jerk.
Yeah.
Like, I've told people, like, is there a reason you're speaking so unkind to me? Is there a reason you're being that way? Have I done something to you other than, you know, other than pulling you over for, you know, driving 47 in a school zone that's 25? Is there something that I did to you to cause you to speak to me so poorly? You know, like, you know, people, and I don't owe them anything. And what's funny is a lot of times people don't understand, like, you know, the I pay your salary thing. No, you don't. Chances are you definitely don't. People's property taxes in the community who hired me to keep their community safe in the way that they appreciate, they pay my salary with their property taxes, not you. You're driving through this town and they don't want you to speed. So, you know, you don't pay me a dime. You're going to pay this community to pay me a dime now that you are a moron driving like this. But, you know, again, you made yourself do that, not me.
Yeah, don't be a Karen. So if there's any takeaway to that, like how should people act during police encounters? I think a lot of people, even people who don't have a super negative view of police or have this expectation, a lot of people just don't know what to do, don't understand how to act, and can get very flustered or confused. Like, how would you advise someone to act?
Just be normal. Yeah, I mean, as much as it sounds like, well, how do I be normal? Like, it's like that's all we need is just people to be normal.
Yeah.
There's no need. There's no need to be like. I mean, the big no is just a bunch of sudden movements. It's like that's the big thing is just, you know, when you get pulled over, like they should teach this to kids. So yeah, you just keep your hands where they're visible and just be calm and yourself. Like that's it. Yeah, running toward an officer at full speed is not suggested, but you know, just understanding like they're in a position to where, you know, the police do regularly enough on the big scale get ambushed or get attacked that it's something that we have to be ready for. But
yeah,
that's not. And that's on us too. We have to. It's not easy, but we have to be able to be professional and not treat people like they have a disease too. Like we have to be able to treat people like people, but be ready for that unknown. You know, if it happens, it's not easy, but we kind of have to learn to do it.
Yeah, yeah. I can imagine that just the kinds of encounters that police have that it would not be. So I recently picked up your audiobook.
Yeah.
And I was listening to all those stories, and it's like if that's something that can happen to you at any point, like you can totally understand that coming into an unknown encounter, yeah, it makes sense.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy, man. It's crazy.
Yeah. So I wanted to touch a couple of other topics that you've talked about in various videos that I thought were interesting. And I think this one's a really good conversation for ethics in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get into a little philosophy here, but carrying Narcan.
Yeah.
So you made a video a while back talking about how, well, maybe you can recap your view on police officers being required to carry Narcan.
So this is one of those things. It seems like it creeps up culturally a lot on a lot of different issues, and that is, I don't even know if there's such a thing as called the law of mutual exclusivity or something like that. But people in our culture tend to make things mutually exclusive. My position is that I don't think cops should be the primary people administering Narcan.
For people who don't know, Narcan is a anti-opioid overdose medication.
Yeah, it's a blocker basically. So people, especially when I made that video, which I'm not a fool, so I know that people were going to respond this way. They're, oh, so you just want people to die? Like, hold on a second. I also think you should get your prostate checked, but I don't think cops should do it. Right. So like,
Right.
how would they feel if, if it was cops responding to all medical issues? Because that's what that is. It's a medical issue. And so my contention is that why don't firefighters drive around in a fire vehicle with Narcan and then just respond to calls that people need it?
Right.
It's an administration of medicine. And so my thing is, now as a cop, as if we didn't already have enough going on, now I'm supposed to administer medicine. And now I take on an additional thing that I'm going to get sued for. I promise you that there are legal issues right now all over this country with cops being sued who did Narcan and the person still died, who didn't do it and the person died, who did it and the person lived. I guarantee all those have a lawsuit right now somewhere at some department. So it creates tension. And if you're not in that position, you don't know what it's like. I've been sued several times. And when you have lawsuits hanging over your head, that's another stress in my life. I don't want it, So it's not that I don't think people should be saved from their ridiculously stupid narcotic decisions. I do. I think that that's fine, but I don't believe that having cops drive around giving people medicine is the solution to the problem. I think that's a Band-Aid, and I think if we're going to apply a Band-Aid, have medical personnel give the Band-Aid. The real what cops should be focusing on is the origin of the issue, which is narcotics dealing and trading and selling and whatever. Like, you want cops to help prevent overdoses? Well, let's deal with criminal issues that are surrounding that. And then in Michigan, at least, they hamstrung us. So now people who contact the police for overdoses become immune to prosecution for the presence of narcotics.
Yeah.
Well, why am I there? Tell me again why I'm here, instead of maybe helping investigate a crime that's going on in the community, or enforcing other laws. There's no law for me to enforce because I can't charge you with a crime of possession of narcotics or anything else. So what am I doing? I've become an ambulance service.
Right.
So my contention in that whole conversation is not that people shouldn't be revived who are having a medical issue due to narcotics. It's that I'm not the one that should be doing it. Right. That's the contention. And of course, like I said, people will take that and make it, well, you just want people to die because they're druggies. Well, you said that, not me. Right. The two aren't mutually exclusive. I can care about people. It's like, yeah, I care about all kinds of issues that I don't want people to drown, but should cops be stationed at public pools to revive people? Should they be lifeguards? Well, we need more cops because we need more lifeguards. Well, why don't you just hire lifeguards? Isn't that what they're for? Right. So like, we have these roles, I think, when it comes to public safety, and well, cops can get there faster. Well, then have firemen drive around. Right. Stop letting them sit in recliners and play video games. Drive around.
I think so. I'm definitely not an expert on this issue by any means, but I consulted my mom, who's actually a pharmacist at a downriver hospital that you've probably taken people to. And I just wanted to get sort of a medical perspective on this. And there's actually one more point on your side of things that I wanted to help sort of steelman that argument before giving the other side. Uh-huh. And that is that when you administer Narcan to somebody who's had an overdose, when they wake up, they're often very violent. They're in a lot of pain. They're belligerent. They're like, that's not somebody who it's all fine and dandy and flowers and candy to to bring to the hospital. Like that in and of itself is a chore. It's often very dangerous. So anyway, on the other side of things, when somebody does have a narcotics overdose, often the first thing somebody does if they don't have Narcan themselves is call 911. And that dispatcher is connected to police, fire, EMS, everything. And time is of the essence with narcotics overdose. And so I think that the rationale there is anybody who's in that spectrum of first response who can get there the fastest should be carrying it, because we just need the first person there. We just need anybody there. And because that includes police officers, there you go. That's Narcan for everybody. Secondly, as a first responder, there's very low risk in actually administering the drug, other than, of course, waking them up. But there's a very low medical risk in administering it. It's similar to like an EpiPen. You know, it's hard to get wrong. So as far as worrying about like injuring somebody or the liability of that, and then lastly, it's a very similar kind of high pressure decision that police officers are already tasked with. And I think some of the rationale is, well, like if these people are already sort of in the mindset or being trained to deal with similar things, it doesn't make sense to have new people put on board who may not be capable of handling the pressure of that. So those are some of the arguments for carrying. I did also ask about some of the statistics of like people they see coming into the hospital after being revived with Narcan. And there are definitely a lot of repeat cases. So like you said, it's not treating the core issue. You see, they said not as many as alcohol, but you see a lot of people who are being revived over and over again. And it's like, it's clearly not helping the problem. It's just costing money and risking people's lives.
Super expensive Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Massively expensive Band-Aid. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I agree with all those things that you said. Whether or not the reality is you can't like overdose on Narcan. Really, you're not going to harm them. But the liability aspect is the court systems don't give a shit.
Right.
People can sue you for anything, and you will get sued for using Narcan or not using it. Guaranteed happening. And that's just another stress. It's another thing we're at. Like, my contention is, and I don't necessarily have the solution per se, but where do you draw the line? Like we already want cops in schools, and we're dealing with kids, and there's so many roles that we are having cops play that go beyond the idea of law enforcement, right? Law enforcement officers, peace officers, keeping the peace, like so many tasks that now we're putting on them. It's just another one to me to make them do that. Now, we had a period at the department that I worked at before where the federal government actually, the DEA had to come in because we were having so many overdoses that they had to try to track down where the fentanyl was coming from that was being laced in this. And you've got to ask yourself as a community, and most of those people weren't even residents of the community. They're people that are there inside the community, but they don't live there. They contribute nothing to my society. As far as I'm concerned, they contribute nothing, right? Like they're offering nothing to the city I was working for, but they're a complete drain because everybody else in the city is paying for me to go. There were days where I would be at a Narcan issue 3-4 times, and all that takes time. It takes a report. I've got to go to the hospital. I might have to babysit that person for a while. My entire shift would be consumed with overdoses. And if you're a taxpayer who pays for me to keep your community safe, well, wait a second. I made a report about my car being broken into 2 weeks ago. Where's the suspects? What have you done for me? What have you helped me do? Instead, this guy at a hotel who has an addiction, who's been revived 5 times by you guys, is revived again And now I'm paying to take care of this guy who's staying at a seedy motel. Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And so my contention is not that we don't need to deal with the problem. It's that we're just not the ones that should be doing it. Train somebody else. When the volume of, if our culture is okay with, this is going to sound really, really harsh. But I think it's true across the board for all things. You don't want the cops to come to your house. Don't argue with your wife real loud and wake up your neighbors. How about that? I don't want to come deal with your marital problems. I don't give two shits. I don't want to be in your life at all. I'm a big, the government needs to be out of my life as much as possible. I don't want people showing up because I'm having an argument with my wife. Well, how about you shut your mouth and don't be loud and bother your neighbors? You live in a community where you agreed that there's a city ordinance that says, obtrusive noise after 10 p.m. is a problem and it's a violation of the ordinance. Don't live there then, if you don't want the cops to show up after 10 when you're arguing with your wife. And there's the same thing. Like, if you don't want to have an issue of these other things, well, decisions have to be made, right? I don't know. Don't do drugs then. I don't know what to tell you. Like,
Yeah.
so what I see with the Narcan issue is a lot of like, well, the cops need to XYZ, fill in the blank. That to me is a ton of pushing personal responsibility. No. Maybe society needs to XYZ. Maybe the people doing drugs need to XYZ. Maybe the people, calling the cops need to XYZ. Like, so I'm all for, like, let's train a Narcan police, that all they do is know how to fight people and have Narcan. And then they go to all the overdoses and are ready to fight these people when they wake up and take them to the hospital.
Yikes.
I'm okay with that. So like, it's just, there's cars that say Narcan police on the side, and all they do is just, they drive around and they wait to use Narcan and fight people when they wake up. So again, to sort of circle back, I recognize that narcotics abuse, overdoses are an issue in our culture and in a lot of communities, needs to be addressed. I just don't think the cops are the ones to address it. I think it's another solution is needed. I think the cops are part of that solution, but only as far as law enforcement goes. Let cops get at the laws that are being violated, that make those narcotics accessible, or cut them off where they're getting passed around or sold in that community, and chase it off. Let them get the dope dealers out of Dodge, so to speak. And that's a whole other conversation, the legality of drugs and all that stuff. Like, but if a community doesn't want it there, you got to let your cops address the issue that they can address. Having your cops go around reviving people who are abusing narcotics is 1,000,000% not the solution.
And I think one of the other things that you were getting at was that people have a perception sometimes, I think, that resources are limitless, but in reality, there's a certain amount of money and attention and time that cops have, that everybody has. So in the end, you're going to have to prioritize certain things. And it seems what you're getting at is like the people who can do their jobs the most effectively and for the most good for what they're trained for, they should stick to doing that, I guess, in summary, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, again, there's no one particular solution other than maybe a different trained group of people when it comes to the Narcan thing. And cops can have Narcan on them, I guess, like, especially like if I touched fentanyl, I would want it for myself, or my partner or something like that, or a citizen. That's fine. But like, being the primary responders to that is just, we're reallocating our tasks. And I think it's a great point. The resources, they are not limitless. I mean, it's a budgeted item. You don't get to walk up to people and say, oh, guess what? We're taking more tax dollars from you to pay for all this. Like, same thing with like body cams, and we demand body cams. Well, who's paying for that? Like, it's not cheap.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other topic that I wanted to touch is one where we typically see a lot of political talk about this issue, and I definitely don't mind including some of that here. But I think it's one where I don't think I've ever seen the actual enforcement perspective, and that's firearms legislation.
Mhm.
I'm in New York, and we have a thing called the SAFE Act. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's very restrictive. And if you look through the details, it seems arbitrarily restrictive, and it also doesn't seem like logistically feasible to enforce. So can you talk about I mean, and again, we can mix politics here. I just want to make sure that we can see the separation.
Yeah.
What is the enforcement perspective on things like firearms legislation?
My perspective is, again, I think there's probably a ceiling or a limit somewhere on where I would feel a moral dilemma. I'm a big believer in states' rights. I'm a big believer in freedom. I I might be in the minority. I don't know. I don't believe we should have any gun laws other than unless you've been convicted of a violent crime, or you've been, and I think this is pretty much already the idea. If you've been adjudicated as mentally unstable, there has to be limits, right? Like I get it. Our right to bear arms shall not be infringed. So, but the question, obviously, and this is why we have courts to interpret that and to set those bounds, right? So, what becomes infringing on that? Am I really infringing if someone is a danger to society, that kind of a thing? But other than that, I think all of our gun laws are way too restrictive already. So, it's tough. Like the only gun laws I really worry about is if you're illegally carrying a gun and you're a criminal, that's a problem for me. So that's about it.
Yeah, I think one of the more specific things that I'd like to talk about with this is the idea of like multi-feature weapons. And again, coming back to the SAFE Act here in New York, they talk about like assault weapons being anything that has 2 or more of these specific features. Like from an enforcement perspective, like how does that? I'm not sure I even understand like where that comes from, and obviously
comes from people who have no clue what they're talking about making laws.
Yeah. So if you were somebody tasked to enforce something like that, like how would that even materialize itself in in the actual world of people dealing with law enforcement?
I think what Chase is asking is when there's a law, like something like a gun law that seems unnecessary or unintelligent, or something that would require you to go out of your way to intrude on an otherwise law-abiding citizen's life. How do you approach that, and is that something you can use your own discretion to
Sort of like
not
we talked
do?
about with
Yeah.
marijuana legislation.
Yeah, discretion doesn't usually extend to that.
Right.
So I only have my personal experience to go on with firearms. I mean, in Michigan, you apply to get a concealed pistol license, and you can carry concealed, or you can transport rifles and shotguns. There's guides to transporting it in your vehicle, moving it from one place to another. Whatever. And if you don't have those things in place, then you're in violation of the law. It's not so much about the weapon itself, although I mean, there's some people who have suppressors. There's some people who have fully automatic weapons. They get a tax stamp. Basically, they apply to the federal government to be able to get these weapons, or sometimes it's just a local permission that you get to have it, or whatever. I think that those laws are already too restrictive, but they're not necessarily. I think they're restrictive, but I don't necessarily consider them oppressive yet, because no one's taking anything from you. So I think that gun legislation is super important, and I think that we should fight for as much broad freedom and capabilities as possible with them. When it comes to, if I was told, hey, John Smith has a weapon that he's not allowed to have, and that's where you start to push me to where I'm like, well, I'm not going to do this job anymore. Like I can't do that, because it's a violation of my conscience. And I think I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Now I have confiscated guns from people that are law, the legal gun owners, in the sense of maybe they got a gun safe and they have guns at home and they've all been purchased legally and owned legally and carried legally and all that stuff, but they punched their wife in the face, and a judge said, "No, I'm taking all your weapons," because they don't want that to escalate. Right now, he's, and to me, I would be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm okay is you decided to punch your wife in the face, so her family, her kids have a right to know, like, oh, well, you don't want it to escalate to a point to where face. So now you got a different scenario there. Now the danger is to take the narrow and apply it broadly and say, well, no one would ever shoot anybody if guns didn't exist, right? So you see that jump?
Yeah.
That's the danger, is to take the narrow example and then make it the broad rule. And I don't think that that's logical. I don't think that makes sense. You're dealing with a specific situation that violence has already been demonstrated. You're not trying to minority report it and predict, who's going to be the criminal. But some people, like, listen, dude, if you think you're Fred Flintstone and that you travel to Mars for work, you probably shouldn't have a firearm. Like, this is like, who gets to decide that? Well, these are big political issues, like, to think through. I just know for myself, like, if I was in a situation where Michigan banned, any caliber larger than 45, and they said, like, oh, well, we're aware of these houses have it and they haven't turned them in yet, go get them. Man, I would be done. Like, I wouldn't have a part of that, because I believe too strongly in the way that our Constitution has been understood up to this point, and that's not my jam.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, makes sense.
One thing I wanted to ask is, how much freedom do police officers have in speaking about their own thoughts on laws, or their ability, using their discretion? Basically, all the stuff you talk about that's everybody finds interesting and people don't know. Are there any rules against that in certain departments, or, like, I guess, why don't we see more of that?
I think a lot of cops are afraid of getting fired. A lot of the police administrations are pretty old school. They don't understand social media, so they're afraid of it. And I think that's one aspect. Sometimes there's policies against it, straight up, like, you can't be on social media, just because they don't want the risk. They just don't want to take the risk of somebody saying something stupid. If I was out here saying, like, I hate minorities, and yeah, I got to deal with them at work, but if I could get rid of them, I would. Like, if I said something stupid like that on social media in a video, right? Like, all of a sudden, now I'm a representative of the department, and now they're liable because they employ me, and this is the view that I have, or whatever. So that's why you don't see more of it, because people are afraid to risk saying something and saying the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong way, or whatever. And our policy right now, I don't even have a policy, like the department that I'm at now, other than I just can't connect where I work with my social media work. But previously, when I started all this, it was just, you have to, the point is to create a positive view of law enforcement. And that was like the main boundary. That was it. So pretty broad. And I just went with that. but a lot of places have more restrictive policies. So it's usually just kind of like department dependent, and that's sort of like a leadership issue. Like some places are real pro social media, and some places are real anti social media.
Yeah, that's interesting. How do you foresee stuff changing in the future, like the role of police officers and law enforcement with social media? Obviously, kind of there are all these issues right now, and I think what you're doing is trying to resolve those in a realistic and modern way. Do you foresee the roles of, like I said, police officers changing because of all this? Do you see a shift? What's your take on where this is all going?
I think eventually you'll see a lot more departments and individual officers with an online presence, like as officers, as police departments, because it's people like me that are going to be the chiefs in 10 years, so it's like as that happens, as that changeover happens of people who have sort of like been in that social media world and that's what they know, then they're going to be very familiar with that as a means of communication. And that's what I try to encourage police administrations now, because they're already missing the boat, because you want to instill the right values and accurate perceptions in kids. Well, you're already too late. If you're not on social media now, you're already missing it. So I would see that it would become more common as it goes along, and hopefully that's a good thing.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, Mike, what other topics do you think that we have not hit in this domain so far, whether it's humanizing the badge, police perception, anything like that?
No, you guys are geniuses, man. You got it all. You got it all covered. The real question is Die Hard a Christmas movie or not? That's really like the main pressing question.
I mean, if you want, that can be your off topic. Alex, anything else on your end?
No, I think that's it.
Cool. Well, in that case, we're going to go ahead and transition to a segment we like to call the off topic. Mike, I explained to you before, this is a section where we let our guest pick a topic. As long as it's not directly related to the main topic, it's okay with us. We'll spend 5 or 10 minutes on it, depending on the topic. It can be anything from a charity you want to promote, a philosophical idea, a book you recommend, a hobby, something somebody said to you in line at the grocery store. So, Mike, what do you have for us?
I don't go to the grocery store, so I don't know what that. I hate it. My kids make fun of me because like I would never. If I had to go grocery shopping, it would take me probably 8 hours.
Yeah,
because I don't know where anything is. The bourbon and the beer, I would find that right away.
Yeah,
but everything else, I don't know. Hobbies. That's okay. So I absolutely love Brazilian jiu-jitsu. That's my hobby. Yeah, I don't really.
Yeah.
I wish I could watch a lot more movies and TV than I do, just because there's some good stuff out there and really entertaining. But for the most part, Brazilian jiu-jitsu is where I spend whatever free time I have. And,
so we've actually, Alex and I have actually done a little bit of BJJ, and I did a little when I moved here to New York. What about it is so like? What captures you about it?
There's so many things, but it's one of the few places in life where lying is impossible, and that I'm really drawn to that. Like,
yeah,
it forces me to be really honest with myself. Like you just can't deceive yourself, and you're not deceiving anybody, right? Like, and that's a rare thing, I think, in our culture, especially in social media, where I could be anybody, right? I could be completely different than the person I am online, or it's so crazy how that is, right? I mean, that's been around a long time in movies and TV. Like, you see actors or actresses and like they could be completely different in real life. And there's some truth to that in social media too. So it's refreshing to go on the mats, like whether I have a bad day and I'm the nail, or whether I've had a good day and I'm the hammer, like there's no denying which one it was, like,
yeah,
it, everybody else there knows it. It is what it is. So it's like, you have a group of people that you get to know that whether it's 3 times or 5 times a week, there's complete transparency and honesty. Like, like I think that's probably like one of the big aspects. And then I hate lifting weights to make myself be less fat, to be able to do something that's kind of tricking me into exercise is good. And then it's real it's cerebral. So I enjoy the never ending process of learning. So yeah.
Uh-oh, Alex, shots fired on weightlifting. What are you going to say? How are you going to respond?
I didn't knock it. I just hate it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a realm that a lot of us are seeking, that like truthful place where we're not fronting about who we are,
Yeah.
And I think the community too. A few of our guests have brought up like having, like, one of the big important things to them is community, and
Yeah.
I just see that being, especially moving around a lot. I haven't had such a strong community, and that it takes a toll, like not having a core group of people that have something. I'm trying to think how to describe it, but like something that you're all in together, like
Yeah.
jujitsu.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's something, just from my personal experience, that having moved around so much the past few years is really difficult not to have, and I encourage everybody to find something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like jujitsu. The way that I came about it was actually very similar to the way that you just described it. I think it was Peter Boghossian on Joe Rogan's podcast, and they were talking about Brazilian jiu-jitsu having good epistemology, basically being able to say, like, you can't fake being a black belt. You
Right.
can't fake having a technique that works. And if you do have if you come up with, I think his example was the rapid pinky jab technique or something, and like if it works, it's in some sense absorbed into your jiu-jitsu practice because it works. And
Right.
the whole point is it works.
Yeah.
And that's how I got interested in it. And Alex and I did a little when we were back in Boston, and then I did a little bit more when we moved here to New York. But I have not kept up with it. I wish I could.
Yeah, it's become I think pretty integral to my life. Like I can't imagine my life without Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Nice.
So I mean and it wasn't always that way. I sort of like, I guess, dabbled for a while and kind of trained, but over the last like year and a half, coming up on 2 years, like I've been really consistent with it, and that's made a lot of difference too. But yeah, I can't imagine my stress levels without having that outlet. So it's good. So
Awesome. Well, Mike, thanks again for coming on the podcast. If people want to follow up with you, want to see your videos, want to watch some teddy bears get blown up, where can they find you?
pretty much any social media, if you look up Mike the Cop, it's there. It's pretty straightforward, whatever your favorite social media is. So yeah, they can find me there. I have the Off the Cuff podcast with my buddy Dave, which is more, we're both cops, but we tend to not talk too much about cop topics. So it's kind of like, I don't know, it's fairly random and fun. Then I'm going to be starting another one called the Mike the Cop Show, where I interview guests specifically around law enforcement and cultural topics. And I started another show just yesterday that is going to be coming out called Prop Culture. I'm actually in this office. You won't be able to see, but like I have the sword used by Ryan Reynolds in Deadpool is right here in a case.
Nice.
I've got the gun that was used by Will Smith in I Am Legend over there. So there's all kinds of ridiculous, amazing props in here. And so we're going to do like movie reviews and prop culture, because my manager gets guns and props put into TV shows and movies and video games. So like
Cool.
Lucille, somebody's carrying around Lucille from The Walking Dead in here in the office today. So like,
Nice.
yeah, cool little things like that. So I got my hands in all sorts of things.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks again for coming on. And yeah, we'll definitely, we'll have links to everything in all the descriptions and all that. So yeah, thank you.
Cool. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Switch is produced by Mojo Filter Media, a company specializing in audio production for video games and interactive media. If you want to support us, the best way to do that is on Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/switch_podcast.
You can also support us by rating and reviewing on whatever platforms you listen to us, thumbs up on YouTube, subscribing, all that good stuff. So until next time.